Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us at the Bloomberg Green Festival. I'm Anna Edwards, live in London for you. And I'm very pleased to say that we're going to be joined now for a conversation with the CEO of Philips, Frans van Houten. Frans, really good to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us at the Bloomberg Green Festival. I get to speak to you often. We talk often around earnings releases. Every quarter, we check in and see how the business is doing. But we don't always have the time to linger on matters sustainable, matters environmental. And so I'm very pleased to get the opportunity to do that with you today. Talking about sustainability, I know that you've recently recommitted with some new targets around sustainability. We'll get to those in just a moment. But you clearly see yourselves as a very purposeful business. You've changed the purpose of the business since you've been there over the last, 9 years or so, very dramatically. I wonder where this drive for purpose, where this drive for sustainability really comes from.
Well, Philips is an innovation company, and innovators should solve the unmet needs of the world. So as an innovation company, you're automatically orientating yourself on your environment and say, what can I improve? What can we do better? And, we were diversified, we were a holding, we didn't have focus. And so early in my CEO tenure, we refocused the company on something where we could make a difference. We said, looking at the global unmet needs as formulated by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we said, okay, health and well-being of people through technological innovation is something that we can really excel at. Right? So we said we're going to put all our money on growing in that business. We divested our other businesses, and that became our purpose. We then did work to crowdsource that among our teammates, about all our associates, and say, what is it that motivates us? How do we run harder, work harder, get more impact? And we formulated the purpose of the company as improving people's health and well-being through innovation, being the best place to work, creating value for our customers and shareholders, but also taking responsibility for our planet and our social footprint and the communities around us. So in other words, we said we are taking a multi-stakeholder approach. We will take an integral view on how we operate. We do not want to cause harm while we innovate, right? We want to do good. And because we made this all very clear and made it integral to how we work, nobody sees it as a burden at Philips. Nobody says, well, you know what, here's corporate with a task. No, because this is how we innovate. This is how we work. This is how we work with suppliers. And as a consequence, the talent that wants to work for Philips is amazing. Right? People want to work for us, and they say, as a data scientist, I rather work at Philips to improve people's health, smart algorithms, for example, instead of predicting, the oil price, right? So,
do you think you were do you think you were ahead of the market in a sense there, Frans? In a couple of senses. Firstly, around talent, do you think that people think very much more about the jobs they will take now based on the purpose of the business that they're going to be employed by? Do you think people are much more purpose driven in general? The new people who you recruit to your business, is it a huge part of the conversation compared to 30 years ago where it might not have been?
Yeah, we are seeing a generation of people who are much more aware of what is happening around them in the world. Of course, this has to do with also the media and the globalization and the awareness of what's going on. And this generation, especially millennials, they want to have a positive impact on the world around them. And we as a company have the same goal. Together, we are stronger. Right? So this is a very positive development, and I think we are early in this, in being part of this transformation. And it has paid us dividends. And moreover, when you do research and development and you innovate new products, if you take along these requirements of energy efficiency or circularity or using recycled plastics or making your products upgradable, then you can do that integrally. And then it doesn't become an afterthought, right? So you just become smarter in developing a product that can have a second life and that has less impact on the environmental footprint. So it's pretty amazing and rewarding if you put your head to it like we do, and everybody enjoys it.
And how have you found the conversations around ESG, climate in particular, but also other ESG matters? How have they evolved? Conversations with shareholders around ESG over recent years?
Well, at Philips, we are very intrinsically motivated to do this. But of course, we need to take our stakeholders along. And we just spoke about how our associates are motivated by it. I would say that in parallel, society has come to place bigger demands on large multinational companies. Society expects multinationals to pay their taxes, to be transparent in what they are doing. And in a way, shareholders have just come around to a multi-stakeholder approach. Very much thanks to what, for example, Larry Fink at BlackRock has propagated. He says we need to take a more inclusive approach. We need to be long-term. You cannot just jive and jump to the quarter results, right? Because that's not how you build sustainable companies. And I very much relate to that. And so when we met at the World Economic Forum already some years ago, I was part of the instigating the Compact for Responsive and Responsible Entrepreneurship. And it's then, of course, a place where you can have engagement and dialogues also with the big shareholders, because they are also visiting the World Economic Forum. And I think it's an education process whereby more and more investors realize that if you run a company in a responsible and sustainable manner, that you are actually a better company, a company that will have less risk, a company that creates value in a more predictable way, because you're not taking shortcuts. And eventually customer preference will become bigger. More and more I see tenders from hospitals that also score their vendors on how they are doing it from an ESG perspective, right? So the whole ecosystem now becomes reinforcing, and we have a head start. Now, when I pitch that to my shareholders, they start to say, oh, but there's something in it, right? And this is where I firmly believe that as leaders, we should drive our own strategy and explain it better to the shareholders rather than just dancing to the short-term whim of a shareholder who says, well, but you know what, all this nonsense, I don't like it. Now, nowadays, I say, well, if you don't like it, that's fine. There are other shareholders as well. Right? So I believe it is important that the company needs to stand for something and take a
Has
stand.
that relationship has that relationship shifted, do you think, then? The relationship between CEO and shareholders and the CEO's ability to stand firm?
I think it has always been that you could take that stance. It's just, are CEOs prepared to take it, right? Are companies prepared to express what they believe in, right? Or are you adjusting your speech depending on which audience you have in front of you, right? So I believe in transparency. We have, I think, demonstrated that we are on a good path of impacting billions of lives through our innovations, and as a result, growing the company faster, expanding our profitability, while adopting this whole commitment to ESG and especially environmental sustainability and social inclusion.
Yeah. And you've renewed just this week, renewed your commitments on various ESG fronts and unveiled some new targets. So how
That's
quickly
right.
are you able to move those targets and to make those targets tougher and tougher to keep the business moving in the direction you want it to?
Yeah, we have been so we announced targets for the years 2020, 2025. Some examples of tougher targets is that we are now committing to the 1.5 degree Celsius scenario for climate change, whereby we will be carbon neutral in our entire business in all scopes, where we put zero waste to landfill, where 25% of our revenue will be according to the circular economy business model. where we improve the lives through our innovation of 2 billion people by the year 2025, where we are the best place to work for the people that share our passion, that join Philips, but with a full commitment to diversity and inclusion, where frankly speaking, also with the recent awareness where we were made again aware of the importance of, for example, Black Lives Matter, where we said we got to do more, right? And we made that inclusive to our social commitment. And here in the Netherlands, there is a lot of public attention and scrutiny to, for example, tax and what tax contribution do you have to the countries where you operate. And for that reason, in our new targets, we included the commitment that we will publish our tax contribution in all the countries where we are active, so that through public scrutiny, we can represent what we stand for.
Mm. We will make sure to scrutinise. On the subject of the carbon footprint, how far beyond Philips' borders does that go? How far down into the supply chain can you probe, and how far into the way that consumers use your products can you exert your influence?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the scientific method identifies scope 1, 2, and 3, whereby scope 1 is basically your own direct footprint, for example, in your office or in your factory, and scope 2 and 3 also have to do with your supply chain as well as the use of your products. So if we design our products to have lower energy consumption during their lifetime, then we are influencing the scope 2 and the scope 3. If we also take back the products and avoid, let's say, waste to landfill, and we can recycle and repurpose the product, then we don't need new raw materials, right? And then you can also reduce your upstream dependency on the planet, and thereby influencing also the effects on climate there. So our commitment encompasses all 3 scopes, and already this year in 2020, we are using 100% green electricity. And so towards 2025, we take a much wider perspective, including the other scopes.
Hmm. And you've mentioned once, at least in our conversation, the circular economy, Frans. How much should we expect from this particular phenomenon or path forward? Because it's gaining momentum. We talked to a lot of CEOs about this. What kind of roadblocks do you come up against, though, when you try to move that percentage higher and higher, the amount of your product that comes through the circular path, so not the linear path, not relying on finite resources, but the circular nature of your product? What are the limits that you run up against when you try to do that more and more?
Well, there's a whole learning curve to go through, and so closing the loop, the first step is no waste to landfill, right? That's the kind of the easy part, and then the next level of sophistication is where you, in a responsible way, take the product back and you recuperate the value of the components in the product, and you try to reuse them, either by repurposing and refurbishing the product for a second life, or by reusing certain components, for example, so that you can get recycled plastics and other materials. But the whole idea is that you close the loop and get the materials back, and you reuse them in some form. Now, that means you need to, in your design process, in the way you design your product, you already need to take into account that you're going to get it back, right? So that you design in a more modular fashion. For example, in a X-ray machine, the tube typically has a much longer life than the bed. Okay, so if I design that in separate modules, I can reuse the tube again and again. Right? So we have a whole business for medical equipment that people can then use at lower price points, and thereby we can enhance access to care. Now, you were asking, what challenges do we see? Well, some people in their procurement practices, customers, they insist on new product. Okay, but if we apply circularity, what is a new product, right? Does it have to have virgin materials Does it have to be 100% new, or is 80% new also new? Right? There are
Mm.
countries that don't allow importation of medical equipment unless it's 100% virgin. And so I think we need to overcome these kind of hurdles, because I think what customers are looking for is the benefit of the product, not necessarily how it is made, right? And
Yes.
therefore, I also would envisage that over time, that customers will adopt new business models where they pay for the benefit, but they will rely on companies like us to take care of the equipment, the maintenance, the equipment, but also, what we do over the life cycle to upgrade and so on. And so I think there's
Yeah.
a lot to learn to become truly circular um, throughout the entire value chain.
And do you think that end consumers, not just of Philips, but just in general, will have to pay more for expecting businesses to play a bigger part in taking the waste out of the supply chain and turning it back into new products? Will prices in general have to increase to reflect what we now expect businesses to do?
Um, at first, at first glance, you may think that, but in the professional equipment where Philips mostly is active, we are already of the conviction that it will not increase prices. On the contrary, we can derive more benefit from all the investments that are made in that supply chain and that product. For consumers, it is a little bit more complicated because the individual value of a consumer product is smaller. And then to close the loop, it also means you need to have reverse logistics. And all of that is effort that not everybody is prepared to make. Let's look ourselves in the mirror. Are we taking all our waste to the right place when you want to dispose of it? Right? That is an effort that not all consumers are going to do. But I think it is very important. And I also think that governments will come with more and more incentives that will nudge people in the right direction. Like currently, there's
Yes.
a whole push going on around virgin plastics. Right? For example, avoid plastic shopping bags because all that plastic goes into the ocean, and that's not great. So I think there's a whole awareness evolving among people in the world that we need to be more responsible about the rare and the scarce materials of our planet.
Yes, I wondered about the role for regulation here, the role for regulators, the role for governments, and incentives to get more businesses to operate in a circular fashion. I wonder if you think of any jurisdictions where this is ahead of others, where this conversation is advanced, or has COVID just meant that these conversations aren't happening as much as they were?
Yeah, well, of course, the attention is now very much on COVID, and rightly so, because it affects people's lives. But there's enough places in the world where sustainability has made it high on the agenda, also recognizing the havoc that climate change is making. Um, Circularity and climate change are interlinked. So the more we close the loop on circularity, also the carbon emissions will reduce. So I think it's a very good thing. Yes, governments have a role to play in education, in potentially incentives or disincentives. Think about CO2 pricing. Right? So all of that can help. But I am here foremost sitting with you in this dialogue to say we need to take our own responsibility, right? It's like earlier when we talked about shareholders, you've got to stand for something and then explain it to the rest of the people. Similarly, towards customers and consumers, I think we have a role to play to just explain this approach and get people to jump on the bus.
And when you have been reshaping Philips, and you've been doing that a lot over the last 9 years or so, Frans, and I know that you're selling the appliances units fairly soon. Do ESG considerations come into that? How do the two weave together? The shape of the business, the things you choose to dispose of, and ESG priorities.
Well, we should not confuse ESG with not, doing good hard-nosed capitalism and return on investments, right? So, I mean, we are separating out our domestic appliances business to put it standalone. It will have a great life as an independent company or being bought by another company. And I'm sure that they are so infused with ESG thinking that also as a separate company, they will continue to radiate that. Just like when Philips Lighting became Signify, as Signify is continuing to operate very much on the ESG path. Right? So I think these decisions are not at all influenced in a negative way or let's say restricted by ESG thinking.
Let me move on to some more contemporary issues in a sense. We've referenced COVID-19 a little in the conversation. Has this been something, I mean, many businesses all around the world, families, individuals all around the world dealing with this, responding to this. As a business, has this changed your priorities at all? Clearly you operate in the health tech sphere, in the health industry, so you're very much at the front line. How has this impacted on Philips?
Well, back early March, when the whole world became panicky, we had a conversation to say, you know, what have we seen in China? What are we seeing in Italy? Clearly, the demand for acute care equipment and software informatics solutions is going to rise dramatically. And we said it's our purpose to improve people's lives through innovation. So we are going to go all out to see whether we can increase capacity so that we can help, let's say, respond to the need for ventilators and patient monitors and interoperability solutions. You could say that was a risk because, you know, we didn't know how long pandemic would take, how much demand there would be. But we decided in March to invest 100 million euro to build a fourfold manufacturing capacity increase so that we could meet demand. Some of our other businesses were suffering and had less demand, so we also shifted people from the business that were affected to the business that needed more capacity. And we also took along all the suppliers in the supply chain to help out. And it was amazing because people were so motivated to improve people's lives and patients at risk, is that people worked day and night to make that happen. And by June already, we had achieved our fourfold increase in capacity, even though much of the world was in lockdown. Right? If you would look at our factories, you would not have thought that we were in lockdown because, you know, we were running at 3 shifts.
And I imagine another part of the business that was at the forefront of this would be anything to do with telehealth and moving in that direction. Is that something, and many people say that pandemics and big shocks to the system, such as we have endured in 2020, they speed up structural changes that were happening in the economy already. And perhaps this is a good example of that. What can we expect from telehealth then in the future, Frans?
You are so right. And we do think that COVID is a game changer for the way healthcare is being delivered. And actually, patients and caregivers can enjoy, you know, their interaction through telehealth. So it changes the relationship in how care is being delivered. Also, telehealth between professionals, because in the COVID time, people realized that professionals in radiology, for example, may not be available there where you need it, but through telehealth, you could actually supplement the care on location remotely. We've also seen that care systems want to make their hospital more resilient by separating out the acute care and the infectious disease from the elective procedures elsewhere. So we are helping hospitals to separate out, you know, what do you do where. And then the whole discussion around data and data access. In some countries, we got questions that as patients were being transferred, you know, how do we get their data to be there at the same time as the patient? Right? And we overnight created the interoperability solution so that hospitals could have access to the patient data without losing time and risking the patient. So that was all pretty amazing. And I think it has opened the eyes of many providers that now is the time to step up the healthcare informatics play and unlock the capacity of the healthcare industry much better to the people that need it. So I'm very enthusiastic about it. I think there's a lot going on, and it's a confirmation of our strategy, in fact. So we will see higher growth as a consequence.
Let me ask you a little bit about the political atmosphere in the US. You're a global business. You do business in the US, but you do business everywhere. Clearly, President Trump has spoken out about his skepticism around climate change. We're sitting here at Bloomberg Green, and we're talking about the importance of ESG. I wonder, when you think about that and you look ahead to November and the election, what is on your mind, Frans, about where the business pushes forward into 2021?
Well, I find it hard to do politics, but I find it easy to stand up for my own beliefs. And that is that we all need to take responsibility to leave a better planet for our next generation, which means we need to take action right now. Right? There's no denying that climate change is real. We only need to look at, the fire in California, or the heat waves in other places, or the droughts that people cannot, let's say, do their agriculture, to realize that it's already late, and that we all need to act straight away, with imagination, with inventiveness, with responsibility. But that's expected from leaders, and that's expected from Philips and other companies.
Yeah, some analysts have suggested there could be opportunities for European businesses, maybe being a bit ahead on this, if we did see a change of administration in the US, or the government of the US adopt a different position on climate change.
Well, you may know that the Chinese character for crisis means also opportunity. Right? So it's a beautiful way to say, yes, it's a crisis, but we can make it an opportunity by taking ownership and responsibility and acting right now.
Frans, on a different note, we've had a question from somebody watching our exchange today who asks about the considerations and how applicable they are to startups. So saying, the questioner asks, can you take your ESG viewpoint from Philips? How can you translate that into advice for startups or smaller companies? How would you advise them to learn from your ESG experience?
I think anybody, whether you're a startup or a scale up or smaller company, all of us can do our bit. And the ESG framework is actually not so complicated. When you think about environment, what can you do with regards to your environmental footprint? How do you design your products in terms of electricity consumption or waste, and how do you deal with that? In terms of the social dimension, how do you treat your people? What's your contribution to society? These are not unsurmountable, difficult questions that you need to have a whole corporation for. Do it as in your own community. And then finally, on good governance, I think this is where smaller companies may have less experience in. But then again, we can help each other, right? And I'm a mentor to small and medium enterprise companies in the Netherlands. And these are typically questions that come up when the company grows from a one-man show to, suddenly you have 10 people, and then you have shareholders, and then you need to take out a loan. So then governance becomes important. But I think if companies help each other, that everybody can go on the learning curve. And there's a great preparedness among large companies to share knowledge, because in fact, that's another contribution that you can pay back to society.
And as we would come towards the end of the conversation then, Frans, you as a business, you've obviously renewed your commitment around ESG. What sort of message would you like to leave us as your priority as we work towards the end of this fairly troubled year and into 2021?
Well, I'd like to dwell upon this word that crisis is opportunity. And therefore, let's not postpone taking action. This is a good moment to take your responsibility and act to make your company more sustainable, and thereby to make society more sustainable. It's fun. It can be a great experience. It will attract the best talent to come and work for you, because millennials want this and expect this from their leaders. And you know what? Philips is growing faster and is making more money and is a more valuable company than we were in the past. So investors like this story also very much. It just has come together in a very nice way for Philips.
Okay, the benefits of the multi-stakeholder approach then from Frans van Houten. Thank you very much, Frans, for joining us. Frans van Houten, the
You're
CEO
welcome.
of Philips, covering a host of subjects here at the Bloomberg Green Festival, talking to us about where the drive for sustainability comes from, about some of their new announcements, about commitments around the environment, around 1.5 degrees global warming, a commitment to that, and translating that into business practices, and then talking a little bit about COVID-19 and how that's impacted the business as well. Frans, thank you very much for joining us.